I want to start with a story about a girl that was talking to her teacher about whales. And the teacher was telling this student that, whales are monstrous mammals, but they have really small throats. And so there's no way that a whale could possibly swallow a human. And this was a Christian girl, and she said, but wait, the Bible says that Jonah was swallowed by a whale. And the teacher said, I know, but you have to understand that's actually not physically even possible. And she says, well, when I get to heaven, I'm going to ask Jonah. And the teacher said, well, what if Jonah didn't go to heaven? To which she responded, well, then you ask him. It's good, right? Today, we're going to talk about heaven. Heaven, to me, is the most encouraging topic I can think of, okay? And specifically, we're going to talk about what heaven is like. What heaven is like. They've asked kids, you've probably seen this on a TV show or somewhere on the internet where kids are asked what heaven is like, right? I love these few responses. One girl said that heaven will be pink skies in clouds made of marshmallows. One young boy said, heaven is when girls get turned into angels and then God tries to do his best with the boys. The reality is there's a lot of misconceptions about heaven, right? I've heard it said that you go to heaven for the climate and hell for the company. Because a lot of people think that heaven's going to be boring, right? I've heard it said that no golfer wants to go to heaven because in heaven, everyone gets a hole in one. If we're honest, as we think about heaven, I was talking to one of my friends backstage, is heaven just going to be like an endless church service? Is I Could Sing of Your Love Forever going to literally be forever? Because reality is, after 3 or 4 songs, don't we start checking out? We're thinking about lunch, thinking about what somebody in front of us is wearing or how they smell or whatever. It's hard to really focus on God. And so the thought of heaven being an endless kumbaya around the fire singing reckless love is not exciting for a lot of people. Most view heaven as angels playing harps, right? Like we've seen in movies, floating around on marshmallow clouds, a land of gumdrops and lollipops, right? The reality is we've been informed often by movies and TV and other things of what heaven is like. And I say that, at least speaking for me. I'm not saying you guys think of heaven wrong and I think of it right. This week, as I was preparing to talk about heaven, I just paused and closed my eyes and say, what comes to mind when I think of heaven? How do you visualize heaven? And I didn't even intend to, but automatically my mind, I was floating, right? And it was kind of a mix of Willy Wonka's Chocolate Factory meets Lord of the Rings. Right? It was that's how I don't know why, but that's what came to my mind, and we're floating around. And the weirdest part for me was it was in black and white. Heaven was in black and white, but it was very weird and mystical, and it wasn't tangible. I couldn't touch heaven, right? And I grew up in the church. I've heard a lot about the church. So this week, what I did is I looked at more than 600 verses in the Bible, not every verse I didn't look at, but looking at the 600 verses in the Bible through this book right here and a couple others, Lectures in Systematic Theology, okay? If you've never read a systematic theology book, that's what they do. A systematic theology is basically taking all these different topics about God and the Bible and the church, and it combines all of the content and data about that particular issue. Okay, so I did that, and I discovered that there's a lot I don't know about the Bible, or about heaven, excuse me. The vision of heaven became clearer and more filled with color in my own mind. Did you know that out of the 66 books, 54 of the books of the Bible speak of heaven? Jesus believed in heaven. In fact, in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus talks about heaven in just one book over 70 times. So what we're going to do today, I had you turn to Philippians chapter 1. We're going to do two things, okay? The first thing we're going to do is look at Philippians chapter 1 because Paul, I think, has penned here in this first chapter some of the best words ever written on how you and I should view heaven. Like, this is a great perspective of heaven. And what you need to know about Paul when he's writing this is he's in prison. And many of his friends believe that he was going to probably be killed soon. And so they're concerned about him, and Paul hears that they're concerned. So one of the big purposes of the book of Philippians is to say, hey, I'm okay. And so in the first chapter, he deals with the issue of death. So that's what we're going to do first. We're going to look at Philippians and see this great perspective. And then what we're going to do, as I mentioned, we're going to look at heaven from the perspective of like a systematic theology book. We're going to just briefly talk about and paint an image of what heaven will be like, but not particularly attached to any verse in the Bible. Okay, we'll share several different verses. So let's look at this perspective that Paul had in Philippians chapter 1, verse 21. If you've been a Christian for any amount of time, you've heard this verse. We studied Philippians not too long ago. For me to live is Christ, and to die is, we all say, gain, right? We've heard that. If I am to go on living in the body, this will mean fruitful labor for me. Yet what shall I choose? I do not know. For I am torn, verse 23, between the two. So what Paul is saying, pause real quick, it's like a tug of war. This isn't Paul saying to be or not to be. Like, life is so hard, like Hamlet, right? Life is so hard. I don't know what's better, life or death. Death seems better so that I'd be freed from prison. No, Paul is saying, hey, Philippians, you're concerned that I might die. Listen, I'm at like actually a tug of war because life is so great and God has such a great purpose for me that I want to stay. I want to stay alive. But the tug of war is that I also want to go home and be with the Lord. You see what he's saying? It's like a tug of war. He doesn't know which one is better. Is it better to stay here and serve God, or is it better to leave this earth and be with God, right? So that's what he's saying. Now, this next little phrase, this is what I really want us to focus on. I desire to depart and be with Christ. And then these next few words, he says, which is better by far. See, what Paul is saying is heaven is far greater than what this life has to offer me. Though this life is great, though there's purpose in this life. And why I point this out and why I think it's very important that we note these words, in the Greek, this was originally written in Greek, right? And I'm definitely not a Greek scholar or anything, but I know enough to kind of get myself in trouble, really. But those words translated in English, which is far better, in the Greek is the word, there's three words, much more better. Terrible English, right? But that's what I've called this sermon, because I think that's so memorable. Paul is saying when he considers heaven and going to be with God, it's much more better. Not far better, not it's going to be rad. It's way, 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 way better. That's the perspective that I think we should have in this life. When we think of death and entering into heaven, it's much more better. See, death is better because heaven is better. Heaven is our eternal inheritance, the Bible says. D.L. Moody, the evangelist, he said this to a friend one day. He said, someday you will read in the papers that D.L. Moody of Northfield is dead, but don't you believe a word of it. At that moment, I shall be more alive than I am now. It's much more better, heaven, right? In fact, someone has said that if we truly understood the glories of heaven, we would rejoice at a funeral and weep in the hospital at the birth of a child. Think about that, how opposite that is of our reality, right? But what I say is it should be both. We should rejoice in life, is what Paul is saying, but we should also rejoice in death, because death is much more better. I recently read that in San Diego, we have upwards of 36 million people visiting our city every year. That's crazy. And I swear like half of them have been in OB for the last month, right? But you know what? None of those people visiting our beautiful city, none of them, like their friends and family back home, are weeping for them. while they're here, right? None of them. Like, they're stoked, maybe jealous of them that they're visiting our beautiful. Well, that's heaven. We shouldn't be sad, though we are. And Paul says it's understandable, but we shouldn't sorrow as those without hope. Because that person just got an upgrade, man. It's much more better. The psalmist said it this way in chapter 84. Better is one day in your courts than 1,000 elsewhere. One day with God, better than a whole existence on this earth. So the first thing I want us to know is this perspective, that heaven is much more better. Would you say that with me? Much more better, okay? It's way, way better. Now, the second thing we want to do, as I mentioned, we want to look at it like topically, systematic theology, and I want to give you, if you pick up any book like this and search heaven, or really just Google heaven, what you'll discover is, in reality, heaven is 3 stages. We can look at it that way. The first stage is called the intermediate state. Have you heard of that? In fact, most people, when I imagined earlier this week heaven, what I was envisioning was more likely this state, which is intermediate. This isn't our eternal abode. It's intermediate. And the intermediate state, let me tell you, is much more better, okay? Throughout the Bible, you might have heard heaven, and referring to the intermediate state, as paradise, or even Abraham's bosom. That is referring to this intermediate state, meaning any of your friends and family, people of old, hundreds, thousands of years that have departed this earth with faith in God, this is where they are right now, in this intermediate state. A few things I want you to know about it. Number one, when we talk about heaven and paradise in the intermediate state, it is immediate. There will be no break in consciousness from your death to being in heaven. Think about that. The very second the brain activity stops, you're alive in heaven. Come on, immediate, right? There's no waiting, there's no downtime. And we know this because Luke chapter 23, verse 43, Jesus told that criminal there at the cross with him, truly I tell you, today you'll be with me in paradise. That's the intermediate state. Now, most people believe that this place will be physical. In fact, a lot of people believe that it'll probably be an alternate dimension or universe, okay? And if you're really into like science and the universe, you know that this is something, string theory, that has been talked about a lot. So most people will probably believe it's that. And according to Luke 16, which is a very important verse or chapter, if you're taking notes today, you might want to write down Luke 16 and read it, because Jesus gives us a lot of information about heaven. But some of the things we learn is that you will still have speech capabilities, okay? You will be conscious, and you will be singing. Now you're like, dude, I don't like to sing. I'm not a singer, okay? But remember, heaven will be much more better. So your singing will be better, and your desire to sing will be heightened because you'll be with God, right? Much more better. You'll have feelings. You'll have personality still. In fact, we read in Luke 15:7 that there is rejoicing in heaven. Like a party, joy, right? Rejoicing in heaven. And some suggest, based on that verse, that you'll be able to see the earth. Because if one person gets saved, one sinner who repents, and they all rejoice, how did they know? Either A, they could see, or there's some kind of telegram system where somebody got saved. But here's what I love, and this is really, I think, why heaven is much more better. There's no more sin. Come on. There's no more temptation. Don't you hate temptation? Right? Like you won't wake up and be tempted. Like you walk out the door and all these things are just bombarding you and right? Just me, maybe just me. But we will be free of sin, temptation, and Satan will be done, right? No more able to afflict you. So heaven is what? Much more better. Far better. So then the second stage, if you're taking notes, is the resurrection. Okay? So what we know as we study throughout the Bible and understand heaven is that the day is coming, and most people believe at the rapture of the church when Jesus returns that he's going to call the dead to life, and that we will be reunited with our physical bodies, right? Which I really, as I studied this, I was like, I don't want this body, dude. Really? I was hoping to like be 20 pounds lighter, right? Have better skin. I got all these like things appearing on my face, you know? But we will be, because it'll be a better body. It'll be much more better. We're thinking in terms of this world. We're not going to care what we look like, dude. Come on. We're going to be in heaven. All of that stuff is gone. There's no more competition. Who's got nicer clothes? Who's got better skin, right? So the resurrection teaches us that our spirits will be reunited with our physical bodies. And the best example of this, to understand this, is Jesus. In fact, in Paul in 1 Corinthians, I think it's 15, he talks about this. If Jesus didn't rise again and resurrect, then we have no hope. But Jesus did rise again, and guess what? For 40 days, you know this, right? Jesus walked around the earth for 40 days after he rose. He didn't just like rise, lay, right? No, he walked around. See? What were they seeing? They were seeing a resurrected, a physical form. He was recognizable. That's going to be you and me. But it'll be a better body. We will be, and you might want to write this word down. I love this. Immortal. Immortal. You can't die. And maybe more than just death is your body will be how it was always meant to be, healed and whole and no longer susceptible to sickness and disease and death. Right? It's like Helen Keller said. You might be familiar with her. She was blind and deaf, and she wrote some really great stuff, an incredible woman. She said, death is no more than passing from one room into another. But see, there's a difference for me, you know, because in that other room, I'll be able to see. See, you'll be you, but healed and whole. Come on, it's much more better, right? And not only will we have immortal bodies, but powerful, upgraded bodies, church. This is amazing. Now, I was talking to someone after. This is just, let me just disclaimer, the Bible doesn't say what I'm going to say, but I think we'll be able to teleport. Because Jesus, if you read Jesus would just show up places. It's like, where did Jesus come from, right? He would walk through walls. Come on. I mean, that's my first 10,000 years of heaven. Teleporting, right? Just teleport. In fact, if I die before you, come hit me up when you get to heaven if you want to learn how to teleport. I'm going to have it down, all right? I can't wait. I'm hoping. If I get to heaven, there's no teleporting. I'm going to be like, nah, right? Okay, so first, the intermediate state, the resurrection, and then the third and final one we'll talk about this morning is the eternal state. And this is where we will be forever. But again, if you're like me, I envision that somewhere in some wild universe out there with, you know, marshmallow clouds. But write down, we don't have time to look at it today, but Revelation 21 and 22. A couple of last chapters of the Bible. There's some chapters in Ezekiel. And again, pick up one of these books. I encourage you to dive into this stuff. But what we learn is our eternal resting place, though we're not just going to be resting, is here. There's going to be, God, we're told, is going to recreate or make a new heaven and a new earth. Meaning, if you want to see heaven, look around you. But it's going to be the perfect version of earth. Come on. Right? So if you really want to see heaven, you don't have to close your eyes. You just open your eyes, look around, but imagine it all perfect how God, no pollution, right? Perfect how God intended it to be. Some have suggested the Garden of Eden is probably our best picture of what the earth will be like before sin entered the world. I heard a great story about a pastor, and he was new to this church, and so he was going to meet everyone. He was just, went out for the day and was knocking on doors and meeting everyone in this little church. And he got to his last stop on a Saturday night, and it was this lady in his church that had been there for many years. And he walks up the porch and he notices the door's open, but the screen door was closed. And he looks inside and he can see lights are on, there's music playing. He knows someone's there, so he keeps knocking. No one's answering. So eventually he gives up. He takes out of his wallet a business card. And on the back of his business card, he writes a verse, which is Revelation 3:20, that says, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock," right? Typical pastor thing, right? And the next day, Sunday comes, and they're collecting the tithe, and they notice a business card in there with another verse written on it. So they go and give it to the pastor. He sees it, and under where he had written Revelation 3:20 was Genesis 3:10, which reads, "I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid, for I was naked." She didn't answer the door. It's probably a good thing. But heaven is going to be much more better. Listen, there will be mountains, streams, trees, but they'll be much more better. Now, in my research of heaven this week, there was a brief moment that I got a little bummed, because Revelation 21 seems to say there will be no more sea in heaven, no more ocean. I love surfing, and I always thought I would be like Kelly Slater in heaven. And the waves would be big and barreling, and I could ride them, you know? So the thought of no ocean, so I got bummed for a second. I was reading all these articles, and everyone was saying, yeah, there's no ocean, surfers, ha, 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 ha. And I was like, this can't be heaven, right? Until I thought, isn't that the best excuse to give my wife why I have to surf all the time now? Right? Babe, I can't surf in heaven, so God must want me to do it all the time now. And I got my mind thinking, wouldn't that be the best slogan for OB? Come to OB, where we have more beaches than heaven, you know? You can use it. That's free if you... Much better. Listen, not only the mountains and the trees and the streams, but you will work, but it'll be much more better. The Bible says that we're going to have jobs. We're going to be busy. We're not going to be singing Kumbaya around a fire forever. Your relationships will be much more better. You're going to see your loved ones. And possibly, again, see all of the loved ones that maybe you've never met before, right? Think about the kind of family reunion you're going to have in heaven. Maybe you never met great-grandpa. You're going to meet great-grandpa. And then he's going to tell you, this is my dad. And he's going to tell you, this is my dad. And think about this, for thousands of years, right? Your whole family tree in heaven. It's funny, my wife and I were talking about this sermon, and I was just talking about, wow, isn't it cool? We're gonna be in heaven, and we're gonna see people we know, and some people we're gonna be like, you're here, right? And then some people are gonna say to us, you're here, right? And she started thinking, she goes, I only signed up for this marriage till death, buddy, right? I ain't gonna be married to you forever, am I? That was good, babe. That was good. No, we will not probably be married forever. This new city, this new earth, this new heavens, we're also told there will be a new Jerusalem. And the Bible gives us data about this city. It says it's approximately 2.25 million square miles. It's a massive city the size of almost the United States, but it will extend past our atmosphere. And they say and suggest it could house up to 11 billion people. So where are all the Christians going to go? Easy, right? It's going to be much more better because there will be no needs. You'll never have a need again. That's amazing. The food will be better. Mostly because you can't get overweight from eating whatever you want, right? I'm going to eat In-N-Out, Takis, and crab legs every day for the first 1,000 years, All the things you keep putting off, no, I can't. Do it! There'll be no more pain. Isaiah 65. Verse 19, I will rejoice in Jerusalem and joy in my people, and the voice of weeping shall be no more heard. No more. No sin. We briefly mentioned this, but this will be our eternal reality. See, we think, how could heaven be fun? It's going to be boring because very few of us have enjoyed pure pleasure. Think about that. Like pure pleasure. Like 100% pure pleasure all the time. It's what the psalmist said in Psalm 16:11. You fill me with joy in your presence, with eternal pleasures at your right hand. Come on, heaven is much more better. Disney will not be the happiest place on earth anymore. Now, I need to confess that a lot of what you're hearing today was stolen from a guy named Randy Elkhorn. He wrote this book called Heaven. And if you haven't read this book, I'd really, 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 really encourage you, because he tells about heaven and talks about heaven in such a profound, it makes it so simple and understandable. So if you really want to learn more about heaven, I encourage you to read his book. He said this, and I think this is so profound. He said, I imagine that our first glimpse of heaven will cause us to similarly gasp in amazement and delight. And that first gasp will most likely be followed by many more gasps as we encounter new sights in this endlessly wonderful place. Like the moment you and I get to heaven, right? Talk about mind blown emoji. Like, and what he's saying is, everywhere you go, it's like that. Endlessly. Teleport. Teleport. Right? Everywhere we go. It's amazingly incredible, beautiful place, he says. So heaven will be much more better. And again, don't think of some celestial world as much as the earth made new. That you and I rule and reign with Christ. Now, I want to close by looking back at Philippians, because if we just stopped there talking about heaven and how awesome heaven is going to be, we'd be missing the most important piece. And that's what Paul said back in chapter 1. In verse 23 again, he says, I am torn between the two. I desire to depart and be with Christ. The treasure of heaven is Jesus. The goal and the heart of every Christian is to be with God. We will stand face to face, no more veils, no more curtains, nothing to hold back the fullness of glory, God's glory. Presence. The one who died for us, the one who loves us, who forgave us, who created us to be in his presence. Now, if you're like me, I this week, when I started thinking about that, like this is something I think most of us, if you're a Christian, that you get, like, oh yeah, God's in heaven. But I really thought about that. I had to think through, like, isn't God everywhere? And God is a spirit. So if you envision like you're getting to heaven and there's like a dude with a big beard sitting on a throne, you're probably going to be super disappointed, because God is a spirit, but yet it says he has a throne, right? So if God is present in heaven, but he's present here on earth, and I truly believe like God is as present here as he is in heaven, right? So what's the difference, right? What's the difference? So I studied that for a little bit and just really thought through it. And I have a couple suggestions, because if Paul is saying, look, I want to die because I want to be with Christ and I want to see God face to face, but we already get that, Paul. Is your theology bad, dude? Do you not know God is everywhere and you can see God? You know, right? So a couple thoughts. Number one, I believe we will have much more better eyes to see. I recently just bought a camera. Okay, you might not know the difference between like a $300 camera and a $3,000 camera. One of the most important things about your camera is the sensor inside the camera, okay? And I love video camera. My wife is a photographer, professional for many years, and I'm kind of like a hobby videographer guy. I'm fascinated by cameras. And for years, I've had an 8-bit camera. Okay, now an 8-bit camera sensor, it can capture and see 17,000 colors. Isn't that crazy? 17,000 colors. But I just got a 10-bit camera, okay? And it was a lot of money, because this guy, 10-bit cameras can see 68 million colors. Now, do you know how many colors your eyes can see? 7 million. That sensor sees way better than my eye. Isn't that amazing? So then if you're into cameras, you go, well, why have a sensor that can see way more colors than my eye can see? Good question. Google it. But isn't that, I really think like our eyes, I believe we'll be able to see like maybe as good of a camera, maybe better. And if I can visually see colors like that, imagine God. Imagine God. So not only will we have better eyes, but listen, maybe more importantly, we'll have much more better brains. See, right now, honestly, when I'm studying throughout the week preparing for a sermon, after like 2 hours, I have to call time out. I'm like, ouch, brain hurts, right? I'm going to go surf or something. But when you get to heaven, your mind is restored and whole and actually has a limitless capacity to learn God and his wisdom and his majesty and all of the things, his justice and his grace. And think of how you'll understand God then and view God then. You're going to have a serious upgrade. And then the last thing is there's no more blur of sin. Right? Like, as long as I'm in this body and on this world, it's blurred because sin is here. In fact, God says that if you were to see him, you would die. You can't, you don't have the capacity to look at God in this sinful body, this sinful flesh, and in this sinful world. It's kind of like if you've ever been, especially like this just happened, we took our dog to the dog beach, and I bring my phone and I try to get some like fun photos of him like jumping around in the water. And I go back home and it was so bright that I could barely like see my screen and see if it got the photo. I took like 100 photos and one of them wasn't blurry. Isn't that funny? Like your camera fails, even though the subject, I clearly had him as my subject in the camera, it would capture like the water more in focus than my dog. Or that kid back there in the background, clearer than the dog. And that's kind of how life is, as long as we're in this world and this body. We know the subject is God. We want God, we want to see God. But because of our fallen flesh, often the thing that we want to be in focus isn't in focus. Sin is distracting us and these other things. And so God is a bit blurred, right? I hope that helps you. Heaven is much more better. And I hope for all of us, at least what God did in my heart this week is I long for heaven more than I ever have. And now when I close my eyes and I think of heaven, I don't think of some mystical world. I think of what God has put in my heart, that this world would be perfect and that I would be in uninterrupted fellowship with God for all of eternity. And that we'd be with loved ones, that you would get to eat whatever you want. And maybe you'll teleport, right? Like heaven is a glorious place, not boring. And like Paul said, yeah, we have purpose here, now, and today. We do. This isn't a message like, oh, I can't wait to get out of here because of all the hurt and pain. No, God says you have a purpose now. But what awaits you is referred to as your inheritance as a child of God. A parent would leave a child an inheritance of a home and $1 million in a bank. What does Almighty God leave to his children? Well, it's much more better. That's what it is. I want to leave you with a meme that I saw this week, and my wife and I laughed about this for about an hour the other day, and it just said how I'm going to walk into heaven. So if we can go ahead and play this meme. It's actually a video meme. I'm coming in. How I'm going to walk into heaven.